Hi, Scary Recaps here. Today, I'm going to explain the movie Under the Shadow from 2016. Beware of spoilers. During the war between Iraq and Iran in the decade of 1980, in Tehran, Shaddow is a young woman who struggles to return to the university and resume her medical studies. This is her life's dream. The dean, however, tells her that this is impossible because of her involvement with a far-left political student group when she was younger. Frustrated by this, she throws away all of her textbooks, except for one, a book of medical physiology, which her late mother has given her. Her husband, Iraj, who is a doctor, tries to comfort her and tells her to move on. Shaddow's daughter, Dorsa, is having nightmares because of the war and the constant airstrikes, but she feels safe with her family. One day Iraj announces to Shaddow that the Department of Health is sending him to Elam, close to the war zone. He advises her to take Dorsa and go to his parents to be safe, but she declines. The two of them argue about their time in the university after the revolution and about how Shaddow chose to join the leftists. Afterwards, Iraj hugs his wife and daughter before he leaves and promises that he will be back soon. He tells Dorsa that her favourite doll, Kimia, will keep her safe during his absence. Shaddow and Dorsa spend now their days together, waiting for the war to end. A boy named Mehdi moves in with the Ebrahimi family, neighbours of Shaddow. Dorsa tells her mother that Mehdi gave her a charm to protect her from evil spirits. Shaddow goes to the Ebrahimis and complains about their nephew of scaring Dorsa with wild tales of ghosts and demons. She is told, however, that the boy is mute after the death of his parents and that he displays strange behaviour. Dorsa insists that the boy whispered in her ear and said to her that the demons are coming. Meanwhile, Iraj calls and asks again from Shaddow to leave the house with Dorsa and go and stay with his parents. Shaddow refuses again, even though Iraj tells her that the Iraq army plans to bomb Tehran soon. During a missile attack, Dorsa forgets to take her doll Kimia and returns to the apartment. She falls down unconscious by the shockwave, and Shaddow wakes her up, only to be called for by the neighbours to save a resident in the upper apartment. Shaddow performs CPR, but it is too late. The old man has passed away. Later on, Shaddow observes the crack in the ceiling from the missile that has struck their block of flats, and luckily for everyone, it didn't explode. As the apartment removes the intact missile, Dorsa tells her mother that she can't find Kimia. Shaddow looks for the doll in vain, and finds out that her daughter is feverish. She puts her in bed and resumes the search. Not being able to find the doll, Shaddow puts tape on the windows and does chores. In the night, Shaddow is wakened by a nightmare and the sound of the front door, which Dorsa is trying to open. She tells her mother that her doll, Kimia, is in the apartment above the crack, taken by them. Shaddow calms down Dorsa and puts her back to bed. The next day, Shaddow discovers that the crack in the ceiling has become a little bigger in some strange fashion. Afterwards, one of the neighbours comes to say goodbye to Shaddow. She also tells her that her father, the old man Shaddow tried to revive, didn't die of a heart attack caused by the missile, but instead was scared to death by an unseen thing he looked at in his room moments before the missile came crashing down. Apart from Dorsa, Shaddow finds herself also affected by nightmares. In one of them, she is under the strong impression that her husband is lying right next to her in bed. Before she can say or do anything, he disappears and a figure hidden under the blanket tries to choke her. She vividly experiences this and asks from some of her neighbours to validate this. They are as confused as she is. The next morning, Shaddow finds her daughter Dorsa attempting to enter the apartment on the upper floor, yelling that her doll Kimia is in there. Shaddow calms her down and takes her to their apartment. Afterwards, Shaddow visits Mrs. Ebrahimi, who tells her that the demons came to their block along with that missile. She hints at Dorsa being haunted by them and that her doll, Kimia, is a valuable thing that, if it is lost, then the person being hunted by the demons is more vulnerable than others. Shaddow dismisses her superstitious tales, saying that her daughter is doing strange things because of her fever. As the neighbors begin to leave their houses in order to avoid the war, Shaddow and Dorsa are plagued by bizarre and vivid nightmares. A little while later, Dorsa's fever persists and Shaddow takes her to a doctor who prescribes her medicine. On the way back, they come across Mehdi and take him to their block before the Abrahimis evacuate as well, leaving now Shaddow and Dorsa as the only residents. Shaddow is too scared to stay there alone and decides to take Dorsa and leave as well. Her daughter, though, wants her precious little doll and can't even think of leaving without her. Shaddow searches again for Kimia, but can't find her anywhere in their apartment. That night, after an air raid siren, Shaddow sees an apparition of a man staring at her from the doorway of her bedroom. She runs to him and witnesses in horror as the man's shade retreats back through the crack in the ceiling. Dorsa speaks to a woman only she can see. Shaddow is alarmed by all this and takes Dorsa and flees the house. While on the streets, police officers stop them and arrest them, both mother and daughter being held in a cell for the night. The next morning, Shaddow and Dorsa return to their apartment. Shaddow seals the crack in the ceiling using duct tape and receives a call from her husband, who reproaches her for not leaving the capital yet. As she hears a knock on the door, Shaddow is locked outside her apartment by a strange creature covered in bedsheets. She manages to get inside and finds Dorsa, who tells her about the lady only she can see. Shaddow searches again for Dorsa's doll and ends up arguing about it with her daughter. Afterwards, as she stands guard, she falls asleep and finds herself leaning against the front door. She picks up the phone and hears the voice of her husband, Araj, accusing her of being a bad mother. She is startled by a fleeting shadow outside the window and later sees through a hole that the book of medical physiology is in the apartment of the 4th floor and not in her drawer. She unlocks it to make sure and instead finds her daughter's doll, Kimia, in pieces. Dorsa is upset by this, but Shaddow repairs the doll with duct tape and gives it to her. An air raid siren goes off then, forcing the two to the shelter. As they descend to the shelter, Shaddow hears a voice from above. Believing the real Dorsa has been left behind and that one she is with is merely a demonic apparition, Shaddow rushes back to the apartment, only to be attacked under the bed by a terrifying creature that resembles her daughter with a huge mouth on its head. She escapes to the shelter and finds her daughter, the real Dorsa, waiting for her there. Suddenly, the being in the bedsheets attacks them both and engulfs them. Shaddow manages to take hold of Dorsa and get out of that nightmarish labyrinth. The creature vanishes, but the floor blackens and seizes her feet. Acting like moving sand, Shaddow sinks deeper into the ground as she tries to get to her daughter. Dorsa then gives out her hand and helps her mother out. The two of them run out of the shelter and into the garage. They enter a car and break down the garage door, finally escaping. But the severed head of Kimia and the book of medical physiology have been left behind, pointing to the unknown air demon's influence till the very end.